Does Ubisoft have what it takes to make a real Tarkov competitor with their recently announced Division Heartland game? The original Dark Zone in the Division games fell short of this concept, but it seems that the devs are back at it again with a new game far more focused on the entire extraction shooter concept. Now, of course, I haven't played it yet, but with the announcement, there's a ton of info that should give us an idea of what to expect. Heartland will be a free-to-play PvE and PvP extraction shooter that expands on the Division story, while also drawing influences from the first game's Survivor DLC and even Far Cry 5. It's set in Silver Creek, which is a fictional middle American town. You're tasked with defending Silver Creek from hostile factions, rogue agents, and the deadly green poison virus that decimated the world. However, unlike New York City and Washington, D.C., the government hasn't sent in the agencies or the division to ensure stability and defend the citizens. The residents of this town had to fend for themselves, and as expected, things went sideways quickly. A rogue division agent named Tower Killian has set up shop. He's using Silver Creek as a base of operations, building an army, and likely working on a mutation of the green poison. Now, when it launches, Heartland will offer two core modes, Storm Operations and Excursion Operations. Storm Ops will be the main attraction, featuring PvE and PvP combat in lobbies of up to 45 players. You'll need to manage your hydration as you explore the map, battling hostile NPCs and enemy players, while looting the gear that you need to explore the contamination zones and upgrade your arsenal. Now, Excursion Ops is a mission-based PvE only mode. Both modes will feature a dynamic time of day system. During daylight hours, the emphasis is going to be on exploring and scavenging, but at night the challenge is going to go up with even more rogue NPCs and additional players. Nighttime is basically when you'll find the juiciest loot as well, so surviving the night is intended to be a challenging and rewarding experience. Surviving an operation is also the only way to secure the loot that you've acquired, which includes new weapons, attachments, and resources to fortify your base of operations, which is an abandoned roller skate rink. The base is going to be where you manage all of your gear storage, your character customization, and your resources. It's intended to be a bit more of a social space than just a private hideout or bunker. The entire base is a shared space, meaning that you'll be able to interact and party up with other players there directly. So if your friends aren't online or you need to find some squad mates, you can walk up to ask other players and see if they want to join in. Now, before launching into an operation, you'll have a chance to organize your go bag, which is your core inventory, your weapons, your armor, and items. And once in an operation, the contamination zones will be dynamic and kind of move around the map. You'll be equipped with a gas mask that has replaceable filters. These filters will protect you for a limited time from that contamination. The idea here is that you'll need the proper resources to loot the contaminated areas, which means the only other players you encounter will likely be geared up and ready for a fight as well. Your stamina will be influenced by your hydration level, which you can manage by consuming clean water that will be found as loot. Playing with friends also gives you the ability to drop and share loot, so not everyone in the squad will need a full inventory before entering a mission. Now, aside from customizing your gear and what you're bringing in, you'll also have 3 classes to pick from for your character. There's the Weapon Expert, Medic, or Survivalist. The Weapons Expert class marks enemies when shot and lets you deploy a sentry turret. The Medic has healing abilities, and the Survivalist can deploy a UAV drone that marks enemies and can see loot through walls when crouching. Now, elements of each of these classes have been seen in previous Division games, so if you played those, they should be pretty familiar. In fact, a lot of things about Heartland might feel extremely familiar, especially to people that played the Division 1 Survivor DLC. That DLC added a mode called Survival, where you battled the elements, a virus, hostile NPCs, and other players. When outdoors, you had a limited time to survive based on your temperature. If you got too cold, you would die. You could huddle near fires and loot better clothing to extend your survival time as well. You also had to manage your infection by looting and taking medication. All the gear you looted during a match needed to be extracted, or it would also be lost forever. In general, it was a pretty rudimentary take on the extraction shooter experience, but it was a huge step forward for the Division at the time. It was the sort of mode that players had expected when the game was first revealed. Instead, with the Division, we got the Dark Zone, which offered similar mechanics, but you could just avoid conflict and leave the area through any exit at the time. And the loot in the Dark Zone was pretty good, but the stakes were pretty low and cheaters had a field day with it as well. So it's possible that Heartland may be finally delivering what players were hoping for back when the franchise first launched. But is it actually better late than never, or has the ship sailed in this case? Now, Heartland also bears some striking similarities to Far Cry 5. That game had a huge departure from the franchise since it was set in rural Montana rather than some exotic foreign country. It depicted a small middle American town being taken over by an extremist doomsday cult. The game was a little more controversial than normal due to its parallels with political extremism and religious fanaticism, which was and kind of has been a hot topic in America. Obviously, the Division games have always been set in America, and their plot revolving around a deadly viral outbreak predated the COVID pandemic as well. And it's interesting to see how both Far Cry and the Division franchises managed to get so close to reality while still maintaining their own sort of fantastical interpretation of it. And that's all to say that it is an interesting choice of location to set Heartland outside of the franchise's typical metropolitan locations. Urban combat has a very different feel to it, and it'll be interesting to see how Heartland plays with its flatter and more rural terrain. Now, the game doesn't have a firm release date yet. Ubisoft will reveal more info this summer, and it's likely that they'll be rolling out multiple test phases before the official launch. Now, the limited combat that Ubisoft have shown in the Heartland trailer so far does look like a fairly typical cover-based shooter that we've seen in past games. Like, it looks pretty much identical to much of the Division's combat. So I wouldn't expect any sort of massive departures on that front. In many ways, it just seems like a new setting for the same old core Division experience with a few twists and new mechanics thrown in for good measure. I guess the question is, will that be enough for it to crack into that extraction shooter fandom, or is Heartland a bit too casual and afraid of the genre's mechanics to appeal to the folks that play games like, well, Tarkov? Maybe a casual Tarkov is something that people want, but games like these rarely stay casual for long, so the mechanics really need to appeal to high-level players at some point. For instance, if there's a mechanic that lets you save your loot under certain conditions, even if you die during a match, that might be a turnoff for fans of Tarkov's more hardcore and brutal extraction system. Weapon customization is also very big in extraction shooters, but Heartland's third-person perspective limits the realism of this. You might not be looking through your red dot when you equip one in the Division, you just get a slightly tighter crosshair while aiming. Heartland looks like, well, just more of the Division and not a bold new direction into the hardcore extraction shooter genre. It blends elements of that genre into the franchise's traditional structure while borrowing influences from its own DLC and Ubisoft's other titles. If you're a big fan of the Division franchise, then it seems like a familiar but now free to play take on it. But if you're an extraction shooter fan hoping Ubisoft will finally make a game that lives up to the hardcore portrayal of the Division's world in both tone and mechanics, I don't think that Heartland is going to be exactly what you want. And from that perspective, it is frustrating seeing Ubisoft setting up worlds and stories that seem ripe for a hardcore and realistic extraction shooter or battle royale experience, only for them to steer more into the Destiny territory than Tarkov. The company has also been painfully late to the extraction/royale game scene. Ghost Recon Wildlands' expertly crafted recreation of Bolivia was the perfect time to make a game mode that took advantage of the large open world PvP environment. Trying to break in all these years later is going to be significantly more challenging. I think making a hardcore, more tactical experience is a big risk for AAA games, considering that the audience is generally more niche than the bigger, more accessible games. And that's probably why the indie developers are currently dominating this space, because big studios are just too afraid to make some of those hardcore gameplay decisions. Accessibility is just so ingrained in AAA design principles. Who knows though, maybe a more casual extraction shooter could work. I think the PvE only mode might not be bad for somebody wanting to wind down with an extraction style experience and not get super sweaty with the PvP side of things. What do you guys think? Are you excited, or does this look like another Ubisoft IP mashup blunder? Let me know in the comments, and next up, check out this video showing an extremely realistic body cam style FPS. It's pretty incredible what indie devs are doing with the Unreal Engine these days. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.